The chain snapped and so did my heart. I was crouched in Sarah's driveway, my hands smeared with grease, trying to wrestle her old bike back to life, when her laugh, bright, unguarded, cut through the summer air like a melody I didn't know I'd been missing. In that split second I knew I was in trouble, the kind that makes your chest ache and your world tilt. It was a Saturday afternoon in our sleepy Ohio suburb, the kind of place where everyone knows your name and your business. I'd lived next door to Sarah for 2 years, our lives brushing past each other in polite waves and small talk about weather or yard sales. She was the kind of beautiful that snuck up on you, auburn hair that caught the sun, green eyes that seemed to hold secrets she wasn't ready to share. At 30, she carried herself with a quiet grace, like she was always one step away from disappearing into her own thoughts. I was 28, a mechanic by trade, more comfortable with wrenches than words, my short hair perpetually messy and my life a little too solitary for my liking. That day, Sarah had knocked on my door, her bike wobbling beside her, the chain dangling like a broken promise. "Emily, you're good with this stuff, right?" she'd asked, her voice soft but hopeful. I'd nodded, grabbed my toolbox, and followed her to her driveway, thinking it was just another neighborly favor. But as I worked, her presence felt different, closer, warmer, like the air itself was charged with something unspoken. "You're a lifesaver," she said, sitting cross-legged on the pavement, her white blouse glowing in the late afternoon light. I glanced up, catching her watching me, her gaze lingering a beat too long. My pulse quickened and I fumbled with the chain, cursing under my breath as it slipped from my fingers. "Need a hand?" she teased, scooting closer. Her knee brushed mine and I swear the world stopped just for a moment, just long enough for me to notice the freckles dusting her nose, the way her lips curved like they were holding back a secret. "Nah, I got it," I mumbled, but my hands weren't as steady as they'd been. I focused on the bike, trying to ignore the way her closeness made my skin hum. We talked as I worked, about her job as a librarian, about the stray cat she'd been feeding, about the way the town felt too small sometimes. Her words were light, but her eyes told a different story, one of longing and hesitation, like she was searching for something she wasn't sure she'd find. By the time I got the chain back on, the sun was dipping low, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. I stood, wiping my hands on my jeans, and handed her the bike. "Good as new," I said, trying to sound casual. She took it, her fingers brushing mine, and didn't let go right away. "Emily," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "why do I feel like this isn't just about the bike?" I froze, my heart hammering. Her eyes were locked on mine, raw and unguarded, and I knew she felt it too, the pull, the spark, the terrifying possibility of something more. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but the words caught in my throat. Before I could figure it out, her phone buzzed, shattering the moment. She glanced at it, her face clouding over. "I should go," she said, stepping back, the bike wobbling between us. "Thanks for everything." She wheeled the bike toward her garage, and I stood there, rooted to the spot, watching her disappear inside. My hands were still greasy, my heart a mess, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something had just begun or ended before I could even name it. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Sarah's laughter drifting through my open window. I peeked outside and saw her in her backyard, tossing a ball for the stray cat, her hair loose and wild in the breeze. I wanted to go to her, to pick up where we'd left off, but doubt crept in. What if I'd misread her? What if that moment in the driveway was just my imagination running wild? I busied myself with work, fixing cars at the shop, but Sarah lingered in my thoughts like a song I couldn't shake. By evening I was restless, pacing my tiny living room, replaying every word, every glance. I'd never been good at this, reading people, taking risks. Growing up, I'd kept my feelings locked tight, especially after my family's raised eyebrows when I brought home my first girlfriend in high school. I'd learned to play it safe, to stick to the sidelines. But Sarah was different. She made me want to step into the light. I grabbed a couple of beers from the fridge and headed to her porch, my heart pounding like I was 16 again. When she answered the door, her eyes widened, then softened. "Hey you," she said, stepping aside to let me in. We sat on her couch, the beers sweating on the coffee table, and talked about nothing and everything: books, music, the way the stars looked brighter out here than in the city. But the air was thick with what we weren't saying. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Sarah, yesterday. What was that?" She looked down, twisting a ring on her finger. I don't know, she admitted, her voice small. I feel something when I'm with you. Something I haven't felt in a long time. My breath caught. Me too, I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. But I'm scared I'm reading this wrong. She looked up, her eyes searching mine. You're not, she whispered, and then she leaned forward, her hand brushing my cheek, and kissed me. It was soft at first, tentative, like we were both afraid we'd break something fragile. But then it deepened, and it was like the world fell away, leaving just us, tangled in a moment that felt like it had been waiting forever. When we pulled back, her eyes were shining, and I knew mine were too. I'm not supposed to feel this way, she said, her voice trembling. Not here. Not with everything. I didn't know what she meant, but the weight in her words was heavy. What's stopping you? I asked, my thumb tracing circles on her hand. She hesitated, then said, my family. This town. They expect someone else. Someone I'm not. I nodded, understanding more than I wanted to. This town, with its picket fences and church suppers, wasn't always kind to people like us. I'd felt the sting of whispers, the sideways glances. But looking at Sarah, I knew I'd fight for this for her. Then we'll figure it out, I said, squeezing her hand. Together. She smiled, but it was fragile, like she wasn't sure she believed me. And as I left her house that night, the taste of her kiss still on my lips, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something bigger, something that might break us both. The days after that kiss felt like walking on a tightrope, thrilling, terrifying, and impossible to turn back. Sarah and I stole moments when we could. Coffee on her porch at dawn, late-night talks in my garage, her laughter mixing with the clink of my tools. But every touch, every glance, carried the weight of a secret we weren't ready to share with the world. Sarah's house became my refuge, a place where I could be myself without the armor I wore in town. She'd sit on a stool while I tinkered with her bike again. Apparently, it was determined to fall apart, and we'd talk about everything but the thing that loomed largest, what this was and what it could cost us. I learned more about her, how she'd moved here after a bad breakup, how she loved poetry but never shared her own, how her family back in Indiana expected her to settle down with a nice guy and start a family. The way she said it, her voice tight, told me how much those expectations suffocated her. One evening, as we sat on her couch, her head resting on my shoulder, she whispered, I wrote something for you. She pulled out a notebook, her hands trembling, and read a poem about a bird trapped in a cage, yearning for the sky. Her voice broke on the last line, and when she looked at me, her eyes were wet. That's how I feel, Emily. Like I'm stuck, but with you. I can almost fly. I kissed her then, fierce and desperate, wanting to promise her the sky and more. But even as we lost ourselves in each other, I felt the shadow of the world outside. This town wasn't just smell, it was watchful. Its eyes always searching for something to judge. I'd seen it before. The way people whispered about the art teacher who'd left after rumors. The way my own family had tiptoed around my coming out, like it was a phase I'd outgrow. The first crack came a week later. We were at the town's annual fair, trying to act casual, just two neighbors grabbing cotton candy and laughing at the kids on the Ferris wheel. But when Sarah's hand brushed mine, I saw Mrs. Carter, the librarian she worked with, narrow her eyes. By the next day, Sarah was quieter, her smiles forced. People are talking, she admitted, staring at her coffee. Mrs. Carter asked if I was spending too much time with you. I felt a spark of anger. Let them talk, I said, but she shook her head. You don't get it, Emily. My job, my familiarity, all I have. If I lose them. She trailed off, and I saw the fear in her eyes, the kind that comes from knowing how quickly acceptance can turn to rejection. I wanted to fight for her, to tell her we could face it together, but doubt gnawed at me. Was I asking too much? Was I pulling her into a storm she wasn't ready for? That night, as I lay in bed, I replayed every moment, her laugh, her kiss, the way she made me feel alive, and wondered if I was being selfish for wanting more. The next morning, I found a note slipped under my door, in Sarah's careful handwriting. Meet me at the lake tonight. 8 p.m. I need to tell you something. My stomach twisted. Was she pulling away? Or was she ready to take a leap? I spent the day distracted, dropping tools at the shop, my mind racing. When I got to the lake, the water was still, reflecting the stars like a mirror. Sarah was there, sitting on a blanket, her knees pulled to her chest. She looked small, fragile, but when she saw me, she stood and ran to me, wrapping her arms around me like I was her anchor. "I'm scared," she said against my shoulder. "But I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose you." I held her tight, my heart swelling. "You won't," I promised, but even as I said it, I felt the weight of the world pressing in. We sat by the lake, talking until midnight, making plans we weren't sure we could keep. She told me about her sister's upcoming visit, how she'd have to pretend everything was normal, how it felt like lying to herself. I told her about my own fears, losing her, losing the life I'd built here. As we walked back to our street, hand in hand under the cover of darkness, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe we could do this. Maybe love was enough. But when we reached her house, a car was parked in her driveway, one I didn't recognize. Sarah froze, her hand tightening in mine. "That's my sister," she whispered, her voice laced with panic. "She wasn't supposed to be here until tomorrow." Before I could say anything, the car door opened, and a woman stepped out, her eyes locking onto our joined hands. Sarah dropped mine like it burned, and in that moment, I felt the first crack in the world we'd built. Sarah's sister, Claire, was a sharper version of her, same auburn hair, but cut short and severe, her eyes more steel than emerald. She crossed her arms, staring at us like she'd caught us stealing. "Sarah, what's going on?" she asked, her voice clipped, ignoring me entirely. Sarah stammered, her face pale. "Claire, too didn't know you were coming early." I stood there, my hands shoved in my pockets, feeling like an intruder in a moment that wasn't mine. Claire's gaze flicked to me, cold and appraising, before she turned back to Sarah. "We need to talk." "Inside." Sarah glanced at me, her eyes pleading, but she followed Claire into the house, the door closing with a soft thud that felt final. I stood on the sidewalk, my heart pounding, the night air suddenly too heavy. I wanted to knock, to demand to be part of this, but I knew it wasn't my place, not yet. I went home, but sleep didn't come. I kept seeing Sarah's face, the way she dropped my hand, the fear in her eyes. By morning I was a wreck, pacing my kitchen, debating whether to go to her. When I finally worked up the nerve, I found her sitting on her porch, her eyes red-rimmed. "Claire knows," she said before I could ask. "She saw us and she's not okay with it." I sat beside her, my stomach sinking. "What did she say?" Sarah hugged her knees, her voice barely audible. "She said I'm throwing my life away. That I'm confused, that this she gestured between us is a mistake. She wants me to come back to Indiana to fix things." Anger flared in my chest. "You're not a mistake," I said, my voice fiercer than I meant. "We're not a mistake." She looked at me, her eyes searching. "I know, but she's my family, Emily. And this town, my job, it's all tied to them. If I lose them, I don't know who I am." I wanted to argue, to tell her she was enough on her own, but I saw the weight she carried, the expectations, the fear of being cast out. I'd felt it 2 years ago when my parents had looked at me like I was a stranger. I reached for her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. "Let's take it one step at a time," I said. "You don't have to decide everything now." She nodded, but the doubt in her eyes lingered. Over the next few days, Claire's presence was like a storm cloud. She stayed at Sarah's house, her disapproval a constant shadow. Sarah and I stole moments when we could, a quick coffee, a walk by the lake, but Claire's eyes were always watching, her judgment heavy in the air. One night I found Sarah in her backyard, staring at the stars. "I told her I'm not going back to Indiana," she said, her voice steady but tired. "She thinks I'm making a choice between her and you." I swallowed hard. "Are you?" She turned to me, her eyes fierce. "No. I'm choosing myself. But it's hard, Emily. It's so hard." I pulled her into my arms, feeling her tremble against me. "I'm here," I whispered. "No matter what." But the world wasn't done testing us. The next day, I overheard Mrs. Carter at the grocery store, her voice low but sharp, talking to another librarian. "Sarah's been acting strange, spending all that time with that mechanic girl. It's not right." I felt the words like a punch, but I kept my head down, grabbing my groceries and leaving before I could say something I'd regret. When I told Sarah, her face crumpled. "I can't lose my job," she said. "It's all I have left." "You have me," I said, but even as I said it, I wondered if it was enough. The town was closing in, its whispers growing louder, and I could feel Sarah slipping, torn between who she was and who she wanted to be. That night, she came to my house, her eyes wild. "I need to get out of here," she said. "Just for a little while. Come with me." We drove to a cabin an hour away, a place my uncle owned by a quiet lake. It was just us, the water and the stars, and for the first time in days, Sarah smiled, really smiled. We swam in the moonlight, our laughter echoing, and when we kissed, it felt like a promise we could keep. But as we lay in the cabin, tangled in each other's arms, she whispered, "What happens when we go back?" I didn't have an answer, but I held her tighter, hoping love could be enough to carry us through. The cabin was our sanctuary, but the real world waited like a storm on the horizon. We spent 2 days there, cooking over a fire, reading poetry aloud, making love under the stars. Sarah's laugh was freer, her eyes brighter, but I could see the tension creeping back as we packed to leave. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted, zipping her bag. "Face them. Be us." I took her hand, my thumb brushing her knuckles. "We don't have to have it all figured out. Just don't let go." She nodded, but her smile was tight. When we got back to town, the air felt heavier, the streets narrower. Claire was still at Sarah's house, her car a constant reminder of the fight ahead. At the library, Sarah's coworkers were colder, their whispers louder. I saw it in the way they avoided her eyes, the way conversations stopped when she entered a room. One afternoon, I was at the shop when Sarah burst in, her face pale. "They're letting me go," she said, her voice shaking. "Mrs. Carter said my personal choices are distracting from my work." I dropped the wrench I was holding, anger surging. "That's bullshit. They can't fire you for who you are." "They're not saying it outright," she said, tears spilling over. "But I know it's because of us. Someone saw us at the lake. The rumors are everywhere." I pulled her into my arms, feeling her tremble. "We'll fight this," I said. "We'll find a lawyer, figure out our rights." "Emily, stop." Her voice was sharp, cutting through my resolve. "I can't fight the whole town. I can't lose everything." I stepped back, my heart sinking. "What are you saying?" She looked away, her hands twisting together. "Maybe we're moving too fast. Maybe I need to figure out who I am without all this." The words hit like a freight train. "Are you breaking up with me?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "No," she said quickly, then softer. "I don't know. I just need time." I wanted to argue, to beg her to stay, but I saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of a world that wasn't ready for us. I nodded, my throat tight, and watched her walk away. The shop suddenly too quiet. The next week was a blur. Sarah avoided me, her porch empty, her lights off early. I threw myself into work, fixing cars until my hands ached, trying to drown out the ache in my chest. But every night I'd see her bike in her garage, the chain I'd fixed still gleaming, and it felt like a piece of me was trapped there with it. One night I found a letter in my mailbox, no signature, just Sarah's handwriting. "I'm sorry. I'm trying to be brave, but I'm not there yet. Please don't hate me." I read it over and over, each word a knife, but I couldn't hate her. I loved her too much. I decided to give her space, but it was torture. The town felt smaller, the whispers louder. At the diner, I overheard 2 women talking about that librarian and her friend, their voices dripping with judgment. I wanted to scream, to tell them they didn't know us, but I kept my head down, my hands clenched. Then came the call that changed everything. It was Claire, her voice tight but not unkind. "Sarah's leaving," she said. "She's packing for Indiana. I thought you should know." I hung up, my heart racing, and ran to Sarah's house. She was in her driveway, loading boxes into her car, her face pale and drawn. "Sarah," I called, my voice breaking. She turned, her eyes wide. "Emily, don't go," I said, stepping closer. "Please. We can figure this out. You don't have to run." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I'm not running. I'm trying to breathe. I can't do this here, not now." "Then let me come with you," I said, desperate. "We'll start over somewhere else." She looked at me, her eyes full of love and pain. "I can't ask you to give up your life for me." "You're not asking," I said. "I'm offering." For a moment we just stood there, the world holding its breath. Then she stepped forward, her arms wrapping around me, and we held each other like we could keep the world at bay. Sarah didn't leave that day. We stood in her driveway, clinging to each other, And something shifted not just in us, but in the air around us. It wasn't a promise that everything would be okay, but it was a choice to try to fight for what we had no matter how hard it got. We sat on her porch steps, talking until the stars came out. She told me about the pressure from her family, the fear of losing her place in the world, but also the way loving me made her feel alive. I told her about my own fears losing her, losing myself in a town that didn't always understand. But I also told her I'd never felt more certain of anything than I did about us. "We can't stay here," she said finally, her voice steady. "Not like this. But I don't want to go back to Indiana either. I want a life with you, somewhere we can be us." I nodded, my heart swelling. "Then let's find that place." It wasn't easy. Sarah fought to keep her job, meeting with a lawyer who helped her challenge the library's decision. The rumors didn't stop, but we learned to tune them out, to focus on the life we were building. We started looking at apartments in a bigger city, somewhere with a community that wouldn't blink at two women holding hands. I put out feelers for mechanic jobs, and Sarah researched libraries, her eyes lighting up at the possibilities. Claire was the hardest part. She stayed for another week, her disapproval softening but not disappearing. One night, she found us in Sarah's kitchen, laughing over a burned attempt at dinner. "You're really doing this, aren't you?" she asked, her voice quieter than before. Sarah nodded, her hand finding mine. "I am. I love her, Claire." Claire didn't smile, but she didn't argue either. "I just want you to be happy," she said finally. And it wasn't acceptance, not fully, but it was a start. We moved 6 months later, to a city where the streets buzzed with life and no one cared who we loved. I got a job at a garage, and Sarah found a library that welcomed her poetry readings. We got an apartment with a tiny balcony, where we'd sit with coffee and watch the sunrise, her head on my shoulder, her hand in mine. There were still challenges, moments when the world's judgment stung, when we doubted ourselves or each other. But we faced them together, building a life brick by brick. Sarah started sharing her poetry, her words finding a home in the hearts of others. I joined a community of mechanics, finding friends who didn't care who I went home to. One evening, as we walked through our new city, Sarah stopped at a bike shop, her eyes catching on a sleek blue frame. "We should get bikes," she said, grinning. "Ride together." I laughed, pulling her close. "As long as you don't break the chain again." She kissed me, right there on the sidewalk, unafraid. And as the city moved around us, I knew we'd found something worth fighting for, not just love, but the courage to be ourselves, no matter what. Our story wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And in the end, that was enough. Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe to get notifications about next videos.